Page 109. At breakfast, I saw the bruises of some of the boys from the second new group. I was certain it would be our turn tonight. I had to find some way to protect us. In the heat of the day, I looked around for something to make a door for our shack. I ran from barn to barn, but I could not find anything useful, and several boys chased me away from each barn. When it was nearly time to go back to our barn and camels, I went into the desert to relieve myself. I need to be careful and make certain no one follows me when I do this. I have seen the bigger boys follow the smaller boys. When I was finished, I saw a spot of red on one of the hills of sand, so I ran to it, slip-sliding all the way up until I grabbed the red and tugged on it. The sand fell away easily. I pulled and pulled until I was looking at a strange kind of net made of red flexible plastic. I balled it up as best I could and ran back to our shack. "What is it?" Yusuf asked as he and the three boys followed me inside the shack. I unrolled the netting and showed it to them. "Our door," I said. Yusuf nodded, understanding immediately. We held it up to the entrance. It would cover it and then some. Hurrying, we hooked the netting onto the tacks and nails that held the shack together near the entrance. We would finish closing it up after dark. None of the new boys ate with us anymore. Each group had separated and now inhabited their own sphere of suffering. That night, the 5 of us took our food into the shack and put up the netting. After we had tied it and looped it onto the nails, we dug out the sand for about a foot in front of the netting, buried the bottom part of it in the hole, then covered it again with sand. When we were finished, Yusuf ran into it. It held. Then we sat and we waited. Talat held my hand, but he did not cry. Darkness, the thumping across the sand. Shadows at our door. A groan as someone ran into the netting. "What is this?" a boy shouted, frustrated. Another boy ran into it. "Some magic thing they have put up," one of the boys cried. Another boy tried to get in. The shack trembled. Would they just tip it over? I got to my feet and whispered to Talat and the others, "Be ready to run." Then one shadow stood at the netting without trying to get in. "This is no magic," the shadow boy said. "We will get you tomorrow." I stepped closer to the door. "If you touch any of us..." What will you do?" the shadow boy asked. "I am already dead." I could not see his eyes clearly, but I knew he spoke the truth. "May the mercy of Allah be upon you," I said. "Don't curse me, boy. It will do you no good. We rule this place." "I see no rulers here," I said. "Tomorrow I will show you personally." Then he was gone, along with the other shadows, and the camp was silent again. "What are we going to do?" Talat asked. "I'm not sure," I said. "They'll just come and get the door when we're not here tomorrow," Yusuf said. "Yes, so we'll take it down in the morning and hide it in the barn," I said. "We'll put it up again tomorrow night, but by the time we get in, we will be gone." "What do you mean?" Suleiman asked. "We'll make a tunnel here and go out the back and hide in the barn," I said. "But what will we do the next night?" Yusuf asked. "I'm not sure," I said. "We'll figure that out later." We spent the next couple of hours digging until we made a hole just big enough for us to crawl out of the shack. In the morning, we quickly took down the door and covered the hole inside and out with blankets. I hid the netting behind the bins in the barn. By the end of the day, we were almost too exhausted to shuffle back to the shack, but we did. We ate quickly, then went inside our shack. Darkness was falling fast, and we could hear the boys at the other end of the camp calling out like women at a wedding. My heart beat so hard in my chest I could barely hear anything else. As soon as we got the netting up, the 5 of us quietly slid out the shack through the hole we had made the previous night. Yusuf and I quickly kicked the dirt back in the hole. Then I took Talat's hand and we quietly ran toward the barn. We could still hear the boys shouting, so we knew they were not after us yet. Once at the barn, we tiptoed inside. We were not allowed in the barn at night, but I didn't see or hear anyone else inside the darkened building who would challenge us. We walked along the side, away from the camels and toward the grain bins. The camels grunted, chewed, breathed. The boys and I held hands and moved along the walls as fast as we could without running into something. Only I tripped over a bucket. We stopped and listened as the noise died away. The camels didn't seem to care. We hurried into the room where the bins were. I closed the door behind us. "There's no lock," Yusuf whispered. "We'll use our bodies," I said. The 5 of us sank to the floor and leaned against the door. I listened but heard nothing besides the breathing of the children next to me. One by one the boys fell asleep. I slept off and on, waiting. Our trick must have fooled them. Before dawn I awakened the boys. I gave each of them 2 dates from the camel bins. "They're poison," Talat said. "No, I had one the first day," Yusuf said. "They just don't want us to eat them." We fed the camels. Then the younger boys groomed them, while Yusuf and I shoveled dung. Zaid and one of the older boys came running into the barn. Zaid's face was purple, Umar purple. He was so angry. "What happened to your hut?" he demanded. "I don't know what you mean, sir," I said. "We left early to get to work." "It has collapsed," Zaid said. "Did you do that?" "No," I said. "It must have fallen after we left." "Well, you'll have to put it back up, or you can sleep out in the sand like so many of the boys do." But, sir, we won't have time to put it up before what? Before night. Not my problem, Zaid said, and turned and left the barn. The older boy watched us for a moment before he followed Zaid. I wondered if he was one of the shadow boys. The 5 of us looked at one another. What were we going to do now? We could try to convince the other children to go after the shadow boys, Yusuf said, and get them before they get us. That would all take time, I said, and we don't have any time. Besides, I don't believe brute force would work. Instead, I had to use what I knew, learn wisely. I went over to the pill bottles. One was almost empty, so I dumped the last pills into a new bottle. Are you going to break it and make weapons? Yusuf asked. No, I said. I'm going to make tea. I got out my pouch and dropped part of the tea leaves into the now empty glass bottle. I put several cloves and a piece of cinnamon into it. Then I mashed a date and added it. I ran to the faucet by the trough, turned it on, and filled the bottle with water. Then I screwed on the cap. When it was time for breakfast, I hid the bottle as best I could under my clothes. With the boys surrounding me, we ran toward the shack, which now lay almost flat on the ground. We spent a few minutes trying to get the shack up again. It worked. We got it up, but it would not withstand another attack until we did more work on it. I put the tea bottle in the full sun in a spot where I thought it would remain unobserved. We ate breakfast, then ran to the camel barn to complete our day. Since we had had little sleep and even less food, we could barely walk to the shack at the end of the day. I grabbed the tea bottle and brought it into the shack. I took a sip. It was not the best tea in the world, but given the shadow boys had probably not had tea in years, it would do fine. We put the netting up across the entrance again. I prayed that what I was doing would work. I didn't know what else to do. We were too exhausted to keep running every night, and they would figure out where we had been hiding soon enough. I stood at the door waiting. Yusuf stayed next to me. The sun fell. I heard it sizzling on the ocean of sand. Pink blanketed the world for an instant. Then it was night. Silence. Then the thumping. The shadow boys ran to our door but stopped when they saw me waiting. I will speak to the one, I said. The shadow boys parted, and the one I had talked to the night before came to the netting. I would like to strike a bargain, I said. You have nothing to offer, he said. I might, I said. My mother was known for her masala chai. It is said to have magical properties. How long has it been since you've had tea? You have tea? I do. I could come take it from you, he said. If it will be emptied into the sand if you try to obtain it by force, I said, but I will offer it to you and more. What else? I ask that you sit and drink the tea and listen to a story, I said. If the story interests you and you wish to hear the end, then you will leave us in peace. I could feel the shadow boy staring at me. It is a deal, he said. Then you must move away, I said, all of you, and sit on the sand while I prepare the tea. The shadow boy shouted to his boys to sit on the sand. Then he slowly backed away. Yusuf undid the netting. My heart was in my throat again, Umar. I did not trust the shadow boy, but I had to try this. We had told Talat and Malik to stay in the back, or to stay in the shack in the corner in case something went wrong. I hoped they would forget about the little boys if they decided to hurt me, especially after they discovered my secret. Suleiman stepped forward and put the thickest blanket on the sand. Your seat of honor, I said to the shadow boy. He kept standing. Yusuf dropped another blanket at the entrance to the shack, and I sat on it. Yusuf sat behind me. Then the shadow boys sat across from me, and I sat on it. Yusuf sat behind me. Then the shadow boy sat across from me. My heart sounded like a drum. Yusuf had found something resembling a cup earlier, and when I nodded to him, he poured the sun tea into the cup and handed it to me. I held the cup out to the shadow boy. First you, he said. I took a sip. He watched me. I handed him the cup. He grabbed it and took a swallow. Then he gulped. More, he said. We filled the cup again. This time he sipped the tea. And so, he said. And so, I said, a young woman married a man who was a great traveler. On one journey, he was gone a long while, and the woman grew lonely. She met and fell in love with a young man, and he returned her love. As it happens, this young man got in a fight with another man, and he was thrown in prison. When the woman discovered what had happened to her lover, she put on the finest clothes and went to the chief of police and said, my brother so-and-so has been falsely accused and is now in prison. Please help me get him released. Now, ordinarily, the chief was not very helpful in these sorts of cases, but as soon as he saw the woman, he was smitten, and he had to have her. I can sign this paper, he said, and that will start the process, but first, may we step into my chamber? The woman knew what the chief had wanted from her, but she said, oh, my lord, this is so public. Will you not stop by my house at such and such and such and such this time? I will sign the paper then. He agreed. Next, the woman went to the Qazi, the man in charge of the whole city, and said, my brother has been falsely accused, and I beg you to help with his release by signing this paper, which the chief has promised to sign too. Now the Qazi was not usually a man to help people with any of their problems, but as soon as he saw Our Lady, he fell in love and wanted her for himself. I will, lady, he said, if you will be so kind as to step into my chamber. Oh, my lord, she said, it is so public. Why not come to my home at such and such at this time? And she named a time only a few minutes after the hour she had told the chief to come. I looked at the shadow boy and all the shadow boys around him. They were quiet, listening. The shadow boy sipped his tea and nodded. Next, Our Lady went to the king and said, "O my lord, my brother has been falsely accused and is now in prison. Will you sign his release as the Qazi and chief had promised, so that I may show it to the treasurer and ensure my brother's release?" The king did not often help people with their problems, but when he saw Our Lady, he immediately fell in love and had to have her. "I will do as you ask," the king said, "but first will you step into my chamber?" "Ah, my lord, I will do as you ask," the king said, "but first will you step into my chamber?" "Ah, my lord," she said, "it is so public. Will you not come to my home at such and such at this time?" And she named a time not far from the Qazi's time of arrival. The king was not so easily put off as the others had been, but eventually he let the woman leave. She immediately went to the carpenter and asked if he could make 4 cabinets, one on top of the other, with locks on them. The carpenter said, "I can surely fashion you the best cabinets in the land. How much will it cost?" she asked. The carpenter was not someone who helped people in trouble, but he, like all the others, had fallen in love with a beautiful woman. "It will cost you nothing if you step into my back room with me," he said. "Gladly," she said, "but it is so public. Bring the cabinets to my house and leave them where I wish. Then return later that evening and I will feed you." He agreed. The woman went home. Later the carpenter came and brought the cabinets and left them. Soon after, someone knocked on the door. She opened it and found the chief there, and I stopped and breathed deeply. That is the end of the tale until tomorrow. The shadow boy tipped the dregs of his tea into his mouth and handed the cup back to me. He stood. My breath caught in my throat. He clapped his hands twice, and the other boys stood and ran like ghosts in the sand. "Tomorrow," he said. Then he too was gone. Yusuf patted my shoulder. "You are a strange boy, Akbar, but you have saved us this night." "We'll see," I said, and we stitched up the net door again. I did not sleep very well. Every time I heard a noise, I sat upright, but no one accosted us. We made it through another night. Day 4? In the morning, I sipped a bit of tea myself. Then the 5 of us went to the barn and did our work. At breakfast, the other 2 groups of new boys came over to us. "Did you hurt them?" one of the boys asked. "Yes, did you kill them all?" another pleaded. "No," Yusuf said. We gave them tea and told them stories. The boys stared at us. "You should have killed them. Tonight I will tell another story," I said. "You may all come. We'll light a barrel. It will be good." The day passed quickly. We ate our dinner, and the other boys came around our shack. Someone dragged a barrel over and lit it. The smell of oil permeated the air, and I was sorry I had suggested it. Yet the light was strangely soothing. As it grew darker, the faces of the boys became golden from flames. Then the shadow boys came. The one I had made the bargain with sat on the blanket near me. I handed him a cup of tea. Then I said, "And so the young woman had invited 4 men over in an effort to get her lover out of jail. The first man arrived. He was the chief of police. She invited him in, praised him, and then sat on the couch with him. He began kissing her. She said, "Oh, my lord, you must sign this first so that we may not forget. Then take off all your clothes while I fetch you something to eat." Some of the boys giggled here. I started to breathe a little easier. The chief quickly signed the release and then hurriedly threw off his clothes. No sooner had the chief taken all of his clothes off when there was a knock at the door. "Who is that?" the chief asked. "Oh, it is my husband," said the woman. "Quick, hide in this top cabinet." And the woman pushed him toward the cabinet. Before he could grab his clothes, he climbed in and she locked him inside. She went to the door and let in the Qazi. She praised him and then sat on the couch with him. He began kissing her until she said, "Oh, my lord, will you sign this release so that we may not forget? Then take off all your clothes so that we may enjoy ourselves. I will fetch you something to eat." He signed the form and had his clothes off when someone knocked on the door. The woman picked up the Qazi's clothes as he said, "Who is that?" "It is my husband, lord. Hide in this cabinet until I can get rid of him." The naked man did as he was told, and the woman locked the second cabinet door. She opened the door and invited in the king. She praised him and kissed his feet. Then they all sat on the couch together, and he began kissing her. "Oh, my king, will you sign the release so that we may not forget as we partake in all earthly pleasures? And then take off your clothes so that we may enjoy ourselves. I will fetch you some food and drink." The king quickly signed and then pulled off his clothes, tossing them here and there. When he was naked, someone knocked on the door. "Who is that?" the king said. "Oh, my lord, it is my husband. Tell him to go away or I will kill him." "No, no, let me handle it my way, please," she said. "Just wait in this bottom cabinet while I get rid of them." The king reluctantly agreed. As soon as he was inside, she locked the cabinet and went to the door. She let the carpenter in. "I'm afraid your work was not very good," the woman said. "The cabinet is not as big as I wanted. I was not able to get into it. So how will my servants be able to properly store my dishes inside?" "Impossible," he said. "It is big enough for 3 men. I will demonstrate." And so he crawled into the third cabinet, and the woman locked him in. Then the woman packed up all of her things, went to the prison, where she showed the signed document to the prison treasurer. He immediately released her lover. They hurried out to the woman's wagons, where she told her lover all that she had done to earn his release. "What now then, pray?" he asked. "We will travel far, far from here," said the woman, and they left and were never seen in this city again. Meanwhile, 3 days went by without the men eating or drinking. They all tried to hold their water, but finally the chief could bear it no longer. He urinated on the Qazi urinated on the carpenter, and the carpenter urinated on the king. "Who makes water on me?" cried the Qazi. "Qazi?" the chief said. "Chief? Oh, that woman has tricked the most important officials in the city. I am thankful the king is not here. The king said, Hold off on the praises, I'm here too. Then they all began making loud noises until the neighbors drew near. After a time, the neighbors came into the house and stood by the cabinets. I think she has trapped a genie in there, one of the neighbors said. Let us get fuel and burn it down. Wait, cried the Kazi, we are mortal men. Let us out. And the 4 men gave their names, and someone recognized their voices and let them out of the cabinets. The 4 men stood naked before the neighbors. They looked at one another and began laughing. What a trick the lady had played on everyone. I looked over at the shadow boy. He held out the cup. I handed it back to Yosef, who refilled it. The glass bottle would soon be empty. The shadow boy sipped the tea and nodded to me. I knew we were not safe yet, so I began to the tale of Sinbad. I started with his first voyage. Yes, Umar, I changed it some, just as I had with the woman. Remember, she had 5 suitors? I described the ship of Sinbad's first voyage, how it was filled up with the most beautiful, expensive cargo, how they stopped at the island to rest, and then suddenly someone told them to run for their lives. It was no island, but a giant fish. The island fish sank and drowned most everyone in it. But Sinbad got away and ended up in another land, even more bewitching. But the story of the land was saved for the next night. The boys all left except for the shadow boy. Do we have a bargain then? I asked him. We do, he said. Even after the tea runs out? Yes, he said, as though he was relieved, as though he had been looking for a reason, any reason to stop what he had been doing. At night, they cannot control us. Then let's do something else with the nights, I said. Why be like them at night? Maybe we can protect ourselves better if we work together. Perhaps, he said. Does Sinbad ever get home again? We will see, I said. And that was how we saved ourselves, Umar, at least for then. Every night the boys gathered and I told part of a story. I stretched the Sinbad story for many nights. I even added a few voyages he never made. It did not make life perfect, but at least we were able to sleep at night without too much worry. The days were still filled with little food and too many kicks and slaps.